The first kind of big thing I want to talk about is zone training. How many of you guys have heard of zone training? How many of you guys use a heart rate monitor when you train? Okay. So what is it? Okay, zone training, heart rate training, there's a lot of different kind of buzzwords for it. Okay, it's really a way to become more efficient. Okay, and that's really the key. Our bodies, they'll run like machines, okay, if we train them correctly on how to do that. The human body is really amazing physiologically on how it taps into its energy sources, okay? And so zone training is one way to really help you get toward training more like a machine, okay? I don't mean to kind of categorize this as cars or engines, but again, zone training is one tool that you can use to help you do that. It also will help you learn your body, and our body talks to us, okay, all the time. Some of us are better at listening at than others. And zone training, with using a heart rate monitor, will help you learn, okay, your body, and really, not that I'm always an advocate for using heart rate monitor, but if you do it enough, you'll get to know. How many of you guys have used it enough where you can take it off, or you forget her today, and you pretty much know where you're at and what you're burning? Right, okay, just by listening to it, okay? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the individual benefits of it, okay? And then obviously how to use it. And I have a worksheet for you that we'll go over, okay? So again, individual training benefits, again, it's going to allow you to customize your training. So if it's a lactate day, if it's a hard day and you're training, you need to be above that threshold, okay? If you don't have a heart rate monitor on, it's kind of a shot in the dark a little bit. You know, if you're working hard, right? And you're, I'm not supposed to be able to talk to anyone. I'm patting, it's probably intervals up and down. But you don't really know how long, when your recovery to when you're going, okay? It's kind of an all-in estimation. Whereas zone training is going to give you an actual beats per minute on where you need to be, whether it's 140 beats per minute, whether some of you cross over it at 150 beats per minute, okay? The more efficient you are you going to cross over sooner or later?
Later.
Later, yeah, absolutely, okay? But until you have those zones defined, you don't really know when you're crossing over, okay? You may cross over earlier than what you actually realize, to be honest with you. And that's the biggest thing that I find when I hook people up to the VO2 and I actually put them on. We'll talk about that in a minute, is people, they cross over and they start burning sugar, which means if you're burning sugar, you're going to start producing that lactate much sooner than what they realize, okay? So to know that, maybe you think it happens at 150 beats per minute, okay? It may happen at 140, okay? So just that 10, 12 beat adjustment can make a big difference in your race time. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So again, that's why knowing those zones is going to be very efficient in the big picture of things. And so hopefully you don't hit that wall sooner, sooner than what you think, okay? And that's really how to use it, okay, is really within your training log here, okay, that you have in your manual. We'll customize that based on your heavy days, hard days, and that's why it's color coded that way, and I'll go over that in just a second, okay? How to customize it? Ask yourself where you struggle at. How many of you guys struggle at your lactate threshold days? How many of you guys think that's your easy? Is that easy or is that your harder? How many of you guys struggle with those days? Harder, okay? Harder. How many of you struggle with your longer runs? Okay. Longer runs, okay. So how to customize that, okay? We want to focus on our weak point, to be honest with you. Okay, so if you find your lactate threshold is where you struggle, you have a hard time with those workouts, you're probably a little bit weaker in those areas, okay? And you're weaker working in those higher heart rate zones. So that's what we would focus on, and we'd spend more of our training time within that. Does that make sense? If you struggle on your longer runs, okay, you're probably a little bit weaker at burning, okay, using that fat for fuel and staying efficient. So then we want to focus the bulk of our training time on that. So if you look at your worksheet as I'm talking, and you look at the individual weekly training percentages spent in zones, okay, what this worksheet allows you to do, okay, is as we figure out our zones here, and I'll talk you through that in just a minute, basically we want, within a week's training time, we want that to equal 100%, right? Okay, we're taking 1 week at a time, okay? We're not looking at the big picture of things. So we want to break up if we're organizing our training zones. And again, we have a calendar that helps guide us. But again, remember, we're all individually different. So we may have to vary that calendar a little bit, okay? And that's okay. So again, if I'm weaker, if I have a harder time, I had a runner last week to say, you know, Jen, I really struggle, you know, with the last portion. My legs feel like oak trees. This was a half marathoner. I don't have anything left. I'm spent, okay? So what I said to her is, we need to increase your tolerance. We need to increase your lactate threshold. We need to push beyond that, okay? So your body becomes a little bit more efficient at that removal, okay? So that at the end, at mile marker 9, when she starts to feel that mile marker 10, because she's a halfer, that we're still feeling efficient, that we don't feel like, you guys know that feeling, right? When you want to just pick your legs up because they literally feel like oak trees, okay? You're pretty much close to hitting that wall. That lactate is really heavy in those muscles. So why is that? Because we're past our lactate threshold, and so I always think of it as a teeter. So that workload is starting to rise, and the efficiency of the removal is going down, okay? So eventually, if you keep up on that pace, I mean, you won't be able to, okay? Fatigue's going to set in. So what we want to create is this to happen. So as you introduce that kick and that fatigue starts to rise, okay, or that workload starts to rise, our body is efficient enough to remove that, it starts to balance out. Does that make sense? It kind of, the easiest way to understand is when you start running, right? Your initial mile, okay, you start kicking in that initial warm-up, that's actually a little bit of a struggle, right? And then do you ever feel like it's like this and then you even back out? Right, that's what's happening, okay? Your body's kicking in and starting to become efficient in choosing the fuel and choosing the energy that it's using. This is what you want to happen throughout that race and how you're varying your pace, okay? You want this to stay pretty even. Now, granted, 26.2, is this eventually going to happen? Absolutely, okay? Absolutely. But again, we want to try and keep it at this as much as possible. Does that make sense? Okay? So this zone training, I guess is my point in telling you this, will help you do that, okay? And help you to customize your workouts to that. Okay, so going back to this chart, okay, if we look at where we're weak, and again, we're taking all of you and kind of lumping it into one chart, okay? Individually, you know, as a performance coach, what I would do is individualize this for that person, okay, and basically off their reads and where they cross over to the lactate. So I would have that customized. But again, you want to focus, you know, the majority of your running time where you're weak. So if you're weak in zone 3, which is the aerobic to anaerobic, and what does that mean, okay? Where is that? That's going to be middle of the line. And if you look at zone 3, I kind of give you some key verbiage to describe what zone 3 feels like and what it would be like, okay? So if you feel like you're weak, okay, and in that, okay, then that's where we'd spend the bulk of our time. Interval training would definitely be to increase that lactate threshold, okay? That's going to increase it. And as we train there, we're going to move it further and further and further. So that means our heart rate's going to get higher and higher before we cross over. We're able to train. And why is that important, okay? Does anyone know why? Why do we want to stay below that?
Stay below your threshold? Just below it?
Yeah.
Because you'll raise it.
Right, because you'll raise it. And but what happens with our fuel? Remember, as it fuels,
fat.
yeah, in fat we get so much more bang for the buck. We're getting 9 calories per gram, which isn't important for this, but again, our body wants to burn fat. It's more bang for the buck. But in order to burn fat, we have to have oxygen available. And if you cross over into that lactate threshold, there's not enough oxygen available for the cells. And so again, we're going to start, that sugar is going to start rising and rising. Therefore, lactate, that burn starts to really accumulate and get harder, get kind of heavier and heavier and heavier. Okay, so we want to stay below that for as long as we can. Does that make sense? And as we raise the bar on that, we can train at we can run at a faster race pace. Does that make sense? So that's how we cut our times down. We can run a faster race pace and still stay below that bar and stay efficient. Okay, and again, you're going to be using the ideal source of fuel, which is fat. Okay, rather than the sugar and the carbohydrates. Now, it's not an all or none law. I don't want you to think it's all fat or all carbohydrates. Again, we're working together. But again, and the last thing we want to use for fuel is protein. Okay, the last thing, now our body will do that in extreme cases, but that's the last thing we want to use. Okay, so increasing that lactate threshold, that's why we want to do that. Does that make sense? Okay, so what zone training allows us to do is train more efficiently, right? Train more efficiently and kind of create that hemi for a body, okay? So then how do we do that, okay? How do we find out, you know, they're like, this is great, Jen, but what do I do, okay? How do I figure it out? How many of you guys know your resting heart rate? Good, okay. How many of you guys have taken it when you initially get out of bed, or actually even before you get out of bed? Good, okay, that's step one, okay? What happens as you have, if you've noticed, as you guys are all obviously trained athletes, but what happens as you start increasing your training? Now, let's say in 6 months, do you guys retake it? You recheck it? Good. What happens?
It goes lower.
Goes lower. So what do you think is happening with our body?
More efficient.
More efficient. So do you think our zones are changing then?
Yes.
Right. Okay, absolutely. Okay, so again, that's something to take note. We first need to figure out where is our resting heart rate. Okay, I've had some athletes come in and it's upper 70s, and we, you know, with 6 to 9 months of training, we're low 60s, and some of you guys are 40s maybe. Yeah. Okay.
High 40s.
High 40s. Not surprised at all. Okay. So no, that's step one. Okay. This formula is for some of you may not be accurate. Okay, because you're going to be above it. Okay, I'll tell you that right now. Okay, but it's a pretty baseline formula. I don't like 220 minus their age because it's really not accurate. Okay, this males and females are going to be a little bit different. I give you that on the upper. If you're looking at the upper right hand side of the chart, this is what I call the working heart rate. And again, for some of you that are the elite and above, your zones are going to actually even be a little bit higher. We have to adjust them and bump them up to fit you, okay? But again, it is much more accurate than the 220 minus the age. So it's called the working heart rate, and I give you the formula, okay? Resting heart rate does play a big part in this, because as it goes down, it means we're becoming more efficient, so we need to change our zones, okay? Max heart rate, okay, this is an estimation for max heart rate. How many of you guys have had a VO2, okay, or have done some of the other sub-max tests to find your max heart rate, okay? If you have, wonderful, okay? And if it's been, you know, recent, okay? Because it changes. I'd say recent, 6 months is probably the longest you're gonna wanna go, because again, max heart rate is max heart rate if you base it off your age, but at the same time, physiologically, there are different things that can be happening that can change that max heart rate. So again, it's kind of a hard thing to ballpark it, okay? There are some field tests, and if you have questions on those, that you can do, that will give you, you know, a gross estimation between 75 and 80%, but it's an estimation at the same time, okay? Again, this is a formula. It gives you an idea, okay, and a range. Males a little bit different than females, so that's how you would get the MHR and to put that into your formula, okay? So then what do you do when you get your working heart rate number, I guess, right? You take these percentages, okay, and you would times that number by these percentages, and that's going to give you an estimation of where your zones are at, okay? Does that make sense? Yes, if you're looking at the sheet? Okay. Now granted, this is an estimation, okay? What happens if you want it sold to where Jen would be crossing over into that lactate threshold? How can we do that, okay? I mentioned VO2, right? What is a VO2? Why is VO2 max important?
Because it gives you the oxygen uptake.
Right. And it really is a way of measuring how efficient our body is, okay, at using oxygen at a cellular level, so on and so forth. But what's more important that you get from the VO2 max test, and really that we find now, in the craze used to be, well, hey, what's your VO2, what's your VO2, what's your VO2? What's Lance's? I gotta be like Lance, you know, it's amazing. And really now that we've gotten a little bit more advanced at exercise physiology, we're finding that really what's more beneficial to getting is our lactate threshold, okay? And VO2, we all have a little bit of a genetic precursor, unfortunately, that stupid genetic word, okay? We do, okay? Can you change it with training? Absolutely, as you become more, but as Dr. Bager says, very little, Jen, very little. You can, again, it's a very small percentage. So what I like to tell people, don't focus on your VO2 max, focus on where your lactate threshold is, okay? And that's what we want to get more efficient, because that's what's going to help you become a better runner and become more efficient, be less likely to have injuries, because why would that help with less likely to have injuries? Because we're running more efficient, our body's working more efficiently, we're not as fatigued. Injuries, what always, as a strength and conditioning coach, I would say injuries always either happen at the beginning or the end. It's usually not the middle. Okay, beginning and the end. Same thing with you guys. Okay, if we're more efficient, okay, our body's less fatigued, again, much less likely to have that. Okay, overuse, yeah, you can still definitely have those overuse, but that will even lower as well. Okay.